Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking literally one of the most remarkable legal documents in human history. Imagine, just for a second, trying to design a massive, nation-building blueprint for a country with unparalleled diversity, deep history, and mind-boggling complexity. You wouldn't just need a basic set of rules. You need an absolute structural masterpiece. And that is exactly what the Constitution of India represents. It's the literal architectural blueprint for the world's largest democracy.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our blueprint for today. 1. Defining the supreme law. 2. The chief architect. 3. Global sources, Indian solutions. 4. Unique features and structure. And finally, 5. The fundamental principles.
Let's start with Section 1, Defining the Supreme Law. To lay the foundation of the Indian state, the Constituent Assembly, which initially had 389 members and later settled at 299, didn't just casually draft a document. They undertook an absolute marathon. We're talking 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. That is the exact amount of time dedicated to meticulously writing the longest written constitution in the world. And they spent roughly 64 lakh rupees in the process. Now, that was a staggering financial investment for a newly independent, economically strained nation, but it was absolutely crucial. They had to get the architecture of this republic right from day one.
And this journey actually kicked off well before the British even left. The drafting process started in December 1946, right in the middle of intense political uncertainty and the looming reality of partition. Fast forward through nearly 3 years of rigorous debate, and the Constitution was officially adopted on November 26, 1949. It then came into full legal force a couple of months later, on January 26, 1950. That specific date was purposely chosen for its historical significance in the independence movement, and of course we celebrate it today as Republic Day. So what did nearly 3 years of intense labor actually produce? Well, it wasn't just a basic rulebook. It became the ultimate safeguard of a massive, nascent republic. It carefully distributed power across the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary to make sure no single entity could ever dominate the others. But maybe more importantly, especially for a society with deep historical inequalities, it codified citizen rights. It was designed to prevent the misuse of power and establish the absolute rule of law. It literally leveled the playing field for millions of people. Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, the chief architect. You really can't talk about a legal text of this magnitude without talking about visionary leadership. And that leader was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee. Born into a marginalized Dalit family, he faced acute discrimination throughout his early life, but he channeled that lived experience into immense academic rigor. We're talking doctorates from Columbia University and the London School of Economics. He became this formidable scholar and a lifelong champion for the abolition of the caste system. That immense scholarly weight, combined with his personal background, deeply influenced the Constitution's heavy focus on fundamental rights, the protection of minorities, and affirmative action policies aimed at uplifting historically oppressed communities. And this brilliantly illustrates his incredibly pragmatic approach. Dr. Ambedkar famously joked that the Constitution was framed after ransacking all the known constitutions of the world. Now, I know that sounds a bit like a legal heist, right? But it was actually rigorous, practical scholarship. The drafters knew they just didn't have the luxury of time to reinvent the wheel. Instead, they actively went out and sought the absolute best global practices, brought them back, and adapted them specifically for India's incredibly complex landscape. Let's look closer at that in Section 3, Global Sources, Indian Solutions. You'll often hear this common criticism floating around. Is the Indian Constitution just a bag of borrowings? Like, is it just a patchwork of foreign ideas? The answer from the framers was a resounding no. It was never blind imitation. It was a meticulous curation process. The framers analyzed how constitutional principles were functioning globally, identified the flaws in how they actually worked in reality, and then carefully adapted those ideas to fit India's unique sociopolitical climate. Let's break down where these ideas actually came from, because every single piece was chosen for a highly specific functional reason. From the USA, India adopted fundamental rights and judicial review, really leveraging America's strong tradition of protecting individual liberties. The UK provided the parliamentary system and single citizenship, which makes sense since Indian administrators were already deeply familiar with that system. Ireland offered the blueprint for the directive principles of state policy, which are essentially guiding principles for social welfare. Canada inspired a quasi-federal structure with a strong central government, and later on, the USSR influenced the inclusion of fundamental duties just to make sure rights were balanced with civic responsibility.
But here is a truly fascinating twist. Despite all those international influences we just walked through, the single biggest source for the Indian Constitution was actually domestic. A whopping 55% of the text draws directly from the pre-existing Government of India Act of 1935. This massive piece of colonial legislation provided the heavy administrative chassis, things like the federal scheme, the office of the governor, and emergency provisions. So while the foreign sources added the democratic soul and the rights-based framework, the 1935 Act was the structural backbone that kept the state running seamlessly during a very tricky transition.
Moving right along to Section 4, Unique Features and Structure. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer unprecedented volume of this document. The Indian Constitution is literally the longest and most detailed written constitution of any sovereign country on planet Earth. Originally, it contained 395 articles, divided into 22 parts and 8 schedules. You might be wondering, why so much detail? Simply put, the drafters couldn't leave anything to chance. They had to account for a vast, linguistically and culturally diverse population. They had to intricately detail administrative procedures, the division of powers, and robust protections for minorities, just to ensure absolute clarity and national unity. Another totally unique feature is how it balances power between two seemingly opposing concepts. On one hand, it functions with federal features. There's a clear division of powers between the center and the states, and a fiercely independent judiciary. But on the other hand, it has very distinct unitary features, a single citizenship for everyone, and a very powerful central government. Legal experts call this a quasi-federal system. Remember, this was born in the immediate turbulent aftermath of partition, so the framers deliberately designed it to operate federally under normal everyday circumstances, but allowed it to essentially transform into a highly centralized unitary state during a national emergency to forcefully protect the country's integrity.
Finally, let's explore the heart of the document in Section 5, the fundamental principles. If you really want to see the soul of this Constitution, it's laid out perfectly right at the beginning in the preamble. Sovereign, meaning completely independent. Socialist and secular, emphasizing social equality and religious neutrality. Democratic and republic, meaning power ultimately lies with the people and the representatives they elect. And it promises justice across social, economic, and political spheres, liberty of thought, equality of status, and fraternity to promote a real sense of brotherhood. Listen, these aren't just fancy buzzwords placed at the front of a book. They are the ultimate guiding philosophy. They act as the moral compass against which all future laws of the nation are actively measured.
So the crucial point is, how does a document like this survive the test of time? It all comes down to a purposefully designed, delicate balance of rigidity and flexibility. It is rigid enough to protect its basic structure and your fundamental rights from arbitrary political whims, meaning certain amendments actually require supermajorities and approval from state legislatures. Yet, at the exact same time, it's flexible enough to be amended by Parliament so it can adapt to the changing needs of a modern, rapidly evolving society. Basically, it's neither too stiff to break under pressure, nor too soft to lose its core identity.
Which leaves us pondering this final, powerful question. How does a foundational blueprint, written with pen and ink way back in 1950, continue to adapt, survive, and effectively govern over 1 billion people in the 21st century? Well, it does so because its architects brilliantly designed it to be a living document, one that was built on borrowed global wisdom, heavily grounded in complex local realities, and fundamentally anchored in justice. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.